can't do this anymore.
Mommy.
Hello, my little sunshine. Come here.
7 maids quit in 6 months, and the 8th one walked into that house and did something none of them ever dared to try. She sat down on the nursery floor, surrounded by 6 screaming 2-year-olds, and she did not move for an hour, not in a chair, not with gloves on, holding a bottle like a shield. She sat down on the cold tile, right in the middle of 6 tiny tornadoes, and she waited. Everyone in that house thought she had lost her mind. By the end of that first week, they would understand she had done the only thing that could have saved that family. Stay with me, because the story will make you believe again that patience can outlast pain, and that sometimes the right person walks to the wrong door at exactly the right time. Before we go further, tell me quickly in the comments, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it where you are? I love knowing who is here with me. Please tap that like button, hit subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that kindness still wins. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The house sat on a quiet street in Connecticut, the kind of street where the lawns were always perfect and the silence always felt a little too heavy. It belonged to a man named Gerald, a billionaire who built his fortune in shipping and logistics, moving goods across oceans while his own home slowly fell apart from the inside. Gerald had 6 children, 3 sets of twins, all born within the same 18 months through a surrogate after years of trying. All 6 were 2 years old, a small army of matching cribs, matching cries, matching chaos. Their mother had left 8 months earlier, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of 6 babies and a husband who was never home, walking out one morning without a note, without a goodbye, just an empty closet, and 6 toddlers who did not yet have the words to ask where she went, only the tears to show it. Since then, the house had become a battlefield. 6 toddlers throwing food at the same time. 6 toddlers crying a chorus that echoed through every hallway. They broke lamps, ripped curtains, hid the housekeeper's shoes just to watch grown adults cry in frustration. 7 maids in 6 months. Some lasted 3 days. One lasted 4 hours. Nobody, it seemed, could manage 6 2-year-olds at once, especially 6 who had already learned that the people who cared for them eventually disappeared. Gerald was rarely home to see any of it. He buried himself in work the way some men bury themselves in bottles, because work did not ask questions he could not answer. Then, on a gray Tuesday morning, a woman named Ruth arrived at that gate with a small suitcase and a resume that had been rejected everywhere else in Chicago before her cousin told her about an opening in Connecticut. Ruth was 34 years old, a black woman with tired eyes that still somehow held warmth, the kind of warmth that comes from surviving hard things and choosing softness anyway. She had raised her younger siblings after her own mother passed. She knew what broken children looked like because she used to be one. Growing up on the south side of Chicago, Ruth had learned early that shouting never fixed anything. When her youngest brother used to rage against the unfairness of losing their mother too soon, throwing chairs, slamming doors, it was young Ruth, barely a teenager herself, who learned to simply sit beside him until the anger burned itself out. Nobody taught her that skill. Grief taught her. She carried that same quiet patience into every job she had taken since. Cleaning houses, watching other people's children, always giving pieces of heart that never seemed to run empty no matter how much life took from her. The housekeeper who let her in, a sharp-tongued woman named Priscilla, looked her up and down and said, 6 of them, "Honey, all at once. You will not last a morning." Nobody does. Ruth just smiled and said, "We will see." She walked into the nursery where all 6 toddlers were mid-meltdown, toys flying across the room, 2 cribs rattling from small, furious hands gripping the bars, a lamp already cracked on the floor from an earlier fight between 2 of the boys. Every previous maid had rushed in trying to control the chaos, grabbing arms, raising voices, begging for calm, usually managing 1 or 2 children while the other for dissolved further into panic. Ruth did none of that. She walked in slowly, stepped carefully around the scattered toys, and sat down cross-legged in the very center of the nursery floor, right in the middle of the storm. She did not speak. She did not flinch when a stuffed animal hit her shoulder, then another, then a third. She simply sat there, present, steady, unshaken, like a rock in the middle of a flood, 6 small storms swirling around her. One by one, the cry began to falter, confused by this strange new woman who was not yelling, not crying, not running away, not choosing one child over another. The 6 toddlers slowly stopped screaming, staring instead. Ruth finally spoke, soft and low, her voice somehow reaching all 6 of them at once. She said, "I am not going anywhere. Any of you, you can be as loud as you need to be. I will still be here when you are done." If this story is already touching something in you, comment below and tell me, have you ever met someone whose calm changed a whole room? And please, subscribe now, because what Ruth discovers next in that house will break your heart before it heals it. For the first 3 days, Ruth did not try to fix anything. She did not force meals. She did not enforce nap time with threats. She simply showed up, sat on floors, absorbed the chaos without adding to it, learning each child's name, each child's cry, each child's particular way of needing comfort. There was Malik, the oldest by 4 minutes, who calmed fastest with quiet humming. His twin, Amara, needed to be held facing outward, so she could see the room and know nothing was sneaking up on her. Josiah liked pressure, a firm hug that made him feel anchored. His twin, Zuri, needed the opposite, space to cry it out before she would accept comfort. The youngest two, David and Naomi, were inseparable and calmed fastest when placed together in the same small space, hand in hand. By the 4th day, something shifted. Naomi and David, exhausted from crying, crawled into Ruth's lap at the same time during quiet afternoon and fell asleep there together, small chests rising and falling against her steady heartbeat. Malik watched this from across the room, arms crossed as much as a 2-year-old's arms can cross, suspicious, like he was waiting for the trick, waiting for this woman to disappear the way everyone else in his short life had disappeared. Ruth caught his eye and simply said, "Come sit if you want." No pressure. He did not sit that day, but he sat the next day. And the day after that, Amara sat beside him, then Josiah, then finally Zuri, until all 6 children were arranged around Ruth like planets finally settling into orbit around something steady. By the end of the first week, the impossible had happened. 6 toddlers who had broken 7 maids in 6 months were following Ruth from room to room, quiet, calm, curious, like plants finally given water after a long drought. One night, during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows of that big Connecticut house, all 6 children woke at nearly the same time, crying out from 3 different rooms. Instead of panicking, Ruth moved calmly between the cribs, gathering blankets, until she had somehow arranged all 6 of them together in the biggest nursery, a circle of small bodies with her in the center, humming an old song her own mother used to sing until one by one, the crying softened into breathing, and the breathing softened into sleep. She sat there on that floor until nearly dawn, unwilling to move and risk waking any of them, her legs numb, her heart fuller than it had been in years. But not everyone in that house was happy about it. Priscilla, the sharp-tongued housekeeper, watched this transformation with narrowing eyes. She had been in that house the longest, had survived every storm, every tantrum, every broken lamp. Yet she had never once managed to calm even 2 of those children at once, let alone all 6 in a single night. Jealousy is a strange, quiet poison. It does not announce itself. It creeps in through small comments, through tight smiles, through whispered conversations that stop the moment the wrong person enters the room. Priscilla began telling the other staff that Ruth was too soft, too permissive, that she was spoiling 6 children who needed firm discipline, not endless patience. She began exaggerating small moments into bigger complaints, twisting Ruth's calm into carelessness, hinting that no single woman could properly supervise 6 toddlers alone without something being neglected. These whispers eventually reached Gerald, who was too distracted, too buried in work calls from his office in New York City, to notice the truth for himself. One evening, after a particularly long week, Gerald came home to find all 6 children in the garden, laughing at bubbles Ruth was blowing for them. Tiny hands reaching up together, their faces lit up in a way he had not seen since before their mother left. He stood at the window watching, and for a moment, something in his chest loosened. But later that night, Priscilla found a private moment with him and painted a very different picture. She said the children were becoming too attached to one woman, that it was not healthy, not safe, for a single maid to have that much influence over 6 vulnerable toddlers. She hinted, carefully, dangerously, that maybe things were happening in that nursery that nobody was properly supervising. Gerald, exhausted, distracted, and still carrying old wounds from his failed marriage, let doubt creep into his mind. 2 weeks after Ruth arrived, Gerald called her into his study. His voice was distant, formal, nothing like the warmth she had glimpsed in him watching his children laugh in the garden. He told her the reports concerned him. He told her maybe this arrangement was not working, that 6 children needed a full team, not one woman's attention. He told her, with cold politeness, that her services were no longer needed. Ruth did not argue. She had learned long ago that some battles cannot be won with words, only with time and truth. She simply nodded, packed her small suitcase, and left quietly before the children woke up the next morning. If you're still here with me, I need you to pause for 1 second and comment below. Has jealousy ever cost you something you work hard for? This story is about to take a turn you will not expect, so make sure you are subscribed before we continue. The days after Ruth left were unbearable in that house. All 6 children stopped eating almost entirely, one by one, as if the grief passed between them like a current. Malik stopped humming to himself. Amar refused to be held facing outward by anyone else, screaming until she was hoarse. Josiah pushed away every hug offered by the new temporary staff. Zuri cried without stopping, refusing all comfort. David and Naomi would only hold each other, sitting silently in corners, refusing every plate of food placed in front of them. A full week passed like this. 6 children barely ate, barely slept, barely spoke. Gerald, watching all 6 of his son and daughters fade in front of him, felt a familiar dread creeping back into the house. The same dread he felt the day his wife walked out. He began asking questions. Quiet, careful questions, the kind a man asks when he finally realizes he trusted the wrong voice. He spoke privately to the temporary staff, to the driver, to anyone who might tell him the truth without an agenda. Slowly, piece by piece, the real story emerged. The exaggerations, the whispered lies, the jealousy dressed up as concern. Meanwhile, Ruth had returned to Chicago, staying with her cousin, applying quietly for new positions, trying to convince herself that love given honestly is never wasted, even when it ends in heartbreak. She had no idea what was happening back in that Connecticut house. She had no idea that 6 small children were slowly starving themselves from grief, missing the one woman who had simply sat on the floor and refused to leave any of them behind. Then, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Gerald did something he had never done before in his life. He got into his car himself, without a driver, without an assistant, and drove all the way to Chicago, following an address his housekeeper reluctantly provided after finally confessing everything. He stood outside Ruth's cousin's small apartment building for almost 10 minutes before knocking, rehearsing words that still felt inadequate no matter how he arranged them. When Ruth opened the door and saw him standing there, rain gathering softly on his shoulders, she froze, unsure whether to feel hope or fear. Gerald spoke first. He said, "I was wrong. I let jealousy dressed as concern take away the one person who finally reached all 6 of my children at once. Please come back, not just for them. I finally understand what my children have known since the moment you sat on that nursery floor." Ruth stood in that doorway for a long moment, tears gathering in her eyes, before she finally said, "Take me to them." The drive back to Connecticut felt different this time, lighter somehow, like the road itself understood something important was happening. When they arrived, all 6 toddlers were seated in a row of small high chairs at the dinner table, untouched plates in front of every single one of them, the way they had been every night for a week. The temporary staff hovered nearby, exhausted, helpless, having tried everything from favorite cartoons to promised toys, none of it reaching 6 children who had folded so completely into grief. The moment the front door opened and they heard Ruth's voice greeting the housekeeper, all 6 small heads turned at the same instant, as if some invisible thread connecting each of them to her had suddenly pulled taut. Amara was the first to move, wriggling free of her high chair straps faster than anyone could stop her, small feet pounding across the floor so fast she nearly tripped, throwing herself into Ruth's legs with force that nearly knocked them both over. Malik followed right behind her, then Josiah, then Zuri, until 4 of the 6 were wrapped around Ruth from every direction, small arms grabbing whatever part of her they could reach, faces pressed into her clothes, shoulders shaking with relieved sobs. David and Naomi, still holding hands the way they always did, toddled over more slowly, and Ruth knelt down further, opening her arms wide enough to gather all 6 of them into one enormous, overflowing embrace, tears streaming freely down her own face now. Gerald stood in the doorway, watching, unable to hold back his own emotion any longer. For the first time since his wife left, he felt something inside the house begin to heal, all at once, in one impossible circle of small arms and one woman's steady heartbeat. That is when Priscilla stepped forward from the hallway, her face pale, her hands trembling. She had been listening, watching everything unfold, and something in her finally broke open with shame. She confessed, right there in front of everyone, that she had exaggerated stories, twisted innocent moments, driven by jealousy she was not proud of. She begged for forgiveness, not just from Gerald, but from Ruth herself, and from the 6 children she had unknowingly hurt through her own bitterness. Ruth, still surrounded by 6 small bodies clinging to her, looked at Priscilla with something that was not anger, but something closer to understanding. She said simply, "Hurting people sometimes hurt others without meaning to. I forgive you, but trust takes time to rebuild." Gerald gave Priscilla one more chance, on the condition that her actions, not her words, would prove whether she had truly changed. To her credit, over the following weeks, she did just that, quietly supporting Ruth instead of undermining her, showing kindness to the 6 children she had once resented seeing loved so completely. If this part of the story is moving you, please like this video right now, and tell me in the comments, do you believe people deserve second chances when they finally show real change? Also, make sure you're subscribed, because the most beautiful part of this story is still ahead. Ruth moved back into that house permanently, and slowly, day by day, the 6 children who once broke 7 maids in 6 months became the calmest, happiest versions of themselves that anyone in that house had ever seen. Malik hummed constantly now, filling hallways with his own made-up little songs. Amara let herself be held any way at all, no longer needing to face outward to feel safe. Josiah and Zuri both learned, in their own ways, that comfort could look different and still be real. David and Naomi still held hands everywhere they went, but now they laughed while doing it. Gerald changed too. He started coming home earlier, sitting at that same crowded dinner table every evening, watching his 6 children thrive under a kind of steady, patient love he had underestimated for far too long. He hired extra help, yes, nannies and assistants to support the sheer physical demand of 6 toddlers, but everyone in that house understood, without needing to say it out loud, that Ruth was the true center holding it all together. Months passed. Ruth became more than a maid in that house. She became the quiet heart that held everything steady, the one all 6 children ran to after scraped knees, the one whose lap always seemed to have room for just one more. She taught Malik and Josiah how to kick a small ball back and forth in the garden, patiently retrieving it from the flower beds 100 times over. She sat on the porch steps every Sunday morning with Amara and Zuri, letting them tangle ribbons in her hair, while she pretended it was the most important task in the world. She read the same 3 books to David and Naomi every single night, never once complaining, because their small voices asking for one more page felt like the greatest privilege she had ever known. Even Gerald began to change in ways that surprised everyone, including himself. He stopped taking calls during dinner. He learned each child's individual laugh, each one's particular fear, each one's favorite food, things he had once left entirely to staff to memorize. Slowly, the man who had buried himself in work to avoid his own grief began to resurface, piece by piece, into the father his 6 children had always needed. One evening, almost a year after she first sat down on that nursery floor, Gerald asked Ruth to join him in the garden after all 6 children had finally, gloriously, fallen asleep at the same time. The Connecticut sky was clear that night, stars scattered like scattered diamonds above the quiet trees. He took her hand gently and told her something he had been carrying for months but had been too afraid to say out loud. He said, "You did not just save my children, Ruth. All 6 of them. You saved this family. You saved me. I do not want you to be their maid anymore. I want you to be their mother, officially, and I want you to be my wife. If you will let me love you the way you have loved every single one of them." Ruth stood there under that quiet sky, tears falling freely, unable to speak for a long moment. This man, who once let jealousy take her away from the children she loved, was now offering her his whole heart, his whole loud, chaotic, beautiful family, his whole future. She said yes. The wedding was small, quiet, held right there in that same garden where he had asked her. All 6 children, dressed in matching tiny outfits, toddled down the aisle together in a wobbling, giggling line, refusing to be separated from one another even for the ceremony. Amara insisted on holding Ruth's dress the entire time. Naomi and David walked hand in hand, as always, unable to imagine doing it any other way. Priscilla stood among the guests, humble, grateful, genuinely happy for a family that had finally found its way back to wholeness, the same family she had once, out of jealousy, nearly torn apart. As Ruth stood there that evening, surrounded by 6 children who once broke every maid before her, and the man who had finally seen the truth, she understood something simple but powerful. Real love does not need to shout, does not need to fight for attention, even when there are 6 small voices demanding it at once. Sometimes it just needs to sit quietly on a broken floor, patient enough to outlast the storm, no matter how many storms arrive at the same time. If this story touched your heart today, you already know what to do. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share with someone who needs to believe that patience and kindness still change lives. Tell me in the comments which moment moved you the most, the nursery floor, the empty plates, or the proposal under the stars. I read every single comment, and I want to hear your heart on this one. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. Until the next story, keep believing that the right person always finds their way home, and I will see you very soon.